Hey guys, I know if you've been on the internet like I have, you've probably listened to podcasts, you've seen the shorts or the TikToks and reels explaining what it means to be a man, right? Andrew Tate will offer his version, and of course, you have to have money and status and popularity. Um, Jordan Peterson has shared many things about what it means to be a man, and his views are closer in line with the Bible, but not necessarily based upon that moral foundation. You have other people, Brian from the Whatever podcast. You have Andrew Wilson, who's been making rounds, all telling you what it means to be a man. But the important thing is not what the culture tells you. It's not our definition of manliness shouldn't be based on our fallen culture and our fallen world. Optimally, we're basing it off the Bible. We're basing it off a good theological foundation. And from this book, Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, probably the best book on the subject. We're gonna go through what it means to be a man from their basic definition of masculinity. So, what Piper and Grudem say, they say at the heart of mature masculinity is a sense of benevolent responsibility to lead, provide for, and protect women in ways appropriate to a man's differing relationships. So, when they write this definition, they explain that this is not the be all end all of definitions for masculinity. There are things you could add, there are all types of subjects you could try to cover when you're talking about masculinity, but we're talking about a biblical masculinity, and we're getting to its very source. We're trying to find the essence of what masculinity is. You don't need to put a bunch of verbs in here of all the things that you need to do. You don't need to put chores in here that are men's chores, and the man has to fix the car and mow the lawn and all these stuff. So we're trying to get what it means to be a man, not what a man does necessarily. So at the heart of mature masculinity is a sense of benevolent responsibility to lead, provide for, and protect women. And I would add in my definition, I would add, protect those who can't protect themselves. Um, because it's more than just women. We would understand that children are covered in this. We would understand that like disabled, elderly are covered in this. And most men have that sense of responsibility for other people, right? You see somebody who's desperately in danger and you'll go out of your way to protect them even though you don't know the person. So, as they continue with the definition, we're going to talk about the leading aspect of the definition. So, leadership. They say mature masculinity expresses itself not in the demand to serve, but in the strength to serve and to sacrifice for the good of woman. So, when we look at the Bible, an example is, right, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. The desire should never be to put yourself first, right? You shouldn't desire to be served. Um, in some ways, you can look at Peter when Jesus was going to wash Peter's feet. Peter did not want Jesus to wash his feet, he did not want to be served. Um, but Jesus said, no, I am going to serve. Jesus made himself a servant leader. Mature masculinity also does not assume the authority of Christ over a woman, but advocates it. So mature masculinity doesn't force its will on women, right? On your wife, you can try all day. On your girlfriend, you can try all day. To assume this authority and to force your authority and to force your decisions on her, right? The Bible says optimally, women will submit to their husbands and men will lead their families. But it never says you must force as a man your wife to follow you. No, you have to be a man who can be followed. You have to be a man who can be respected for his authority and his decision making. I've seen lots of families where they assume the authority over the woman, and they try to force it. But like with all things, like with salvation, God doesn't force his will upon anyone that they would be saved, but that instead that they would choose out of their own free will to call upon him. In the same way, right? God allows us to lead, and God allows them to choose to be led or to choose not to be led. But the way the dynamic works is that it works best when we start leading, we start sacrificing, and then women see this, and then they're ready to submit to a good man. That doesn't mean pick a woman who's not going to submit, but there are going to be struggles, right? That was part of the curse, was that the desire was going to be over her husband, right? And the desire for men is to not lead. The desire for men is to, okay, Eve made the decision to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And I'm going to do it too, since that's what she wants me to do. So mature masculinity also does not presume superiority, but mobilizes the strengths of others. So mature masculinity doesn't make women second-class citizens. Um, it doesn't mean men are better because men are stronger. Men are better because men are faster. Men are better because they're better hunters. No, there's not a superiority. If you look at men on average and women on average, and you look at intelligence, well, it's pretty even between each sex. So there's not an intelligence average, but there are different um, aspects that each gender, each sex has advantages in. Men, like you can look this up, spatial reasoning, men are always better at spatial reasoning and recognizing objects and figuring out how things work. Women are better at remembering faces, they're better at sensing emotions, other people's emotions, and understanding them. Um, so, mature masculinity doesn't presume superiority, right? They're not second class citizens, but mobilizes the strengths of others. And this is where biblical leadership in the church comes to play. When you mobilize the strengths of others, guess what? You aren't being a micromanager anymore. You can read any leadership book, and micromanaging is never a good leadership style. It's never a good approach to micromanage people and to have to tell them what to do all the time. To have a wife that you set her schedule. On Tuesdays at 2 p.m., you'll go to the grocery store. On Wednesdays, you'll pick up the dry cleaning. On Thursday, you'll go pay the electric bill. Why would you need to do that? Your wife can set her own schedule and be able to do that. Now, you need to understand whose responsibility it is, who's overseeing what in the family. Because if you're working a job and she's staying at home, you're going to need to divide things. Even if y'all are both working jobs, you'll need to divide the responsibilities and oversee the different aspects of things that need to get done. So mobilize the strengths of others. If somebody better in their relationship at finances, then maybe they can oversee the finances, not leave the other person out, but oversee them and ensure that the bills are paid each month. There's all types of aspects like that. Mature masculinity does not have to initiate every action, but feels responsibility to provide a general pattern of initiative. And I think this is a good aspect, especially when it's in a romantic way. I know people who talk about, women shouldn't ask men out on a date, which I used to think that. I used to think women shouldn't ask men out on a date first. But I think there is a way for women to be inviting, for men to initiate, and sometimes maybe women do initiate when there's trouble in the relationship. When there's distance in the relationship, the man should be making the effort to initiate and to reconcile with the other person most of the time, if not all the time, because that's the responsibility of leadership. But it's not an obligation to always have to initiate and always have to do everything, and it's only masculine. It's only masculine to do it, and not feminine. No, it's masculine to sacrifice and to lead, But there is a door open for women to do the same, for women to reconcile and to bolster the relationship in that aspect. Mature masculinity accepts the burden of the final say in disagreements between husband and wife, but does not presume to use it in every instance. Essentially, what they're saying here is there's not always an equal vote. If there's a one and one vote, right, a husband and a wife, then you're going to result in a tie. And a tie means that you get nowhere. And if a compromise can't be made on the subject in a good way, why you're are you not going to pay your mortgage because you can't decide on how much you're going to pay on your mortgage or what you're going to put first? Are you not going to decide on like the kids going to school and so they're just not going to go to school? No, you should accept the say of your wife. You should accept her intuition and take it into understanding. And there are times when you say, yeah, you thought about it and I didn't. And there are times when you accept the burden of the final say and you make the decision yourself, um, and she submits to that decision. But it's not a presumption to just override your wife, override her feelings and her intuition, her instincts, and her knowledge in every instance, right? You're two becoming one. So that means there are aspects to each of you because you're different people, where you each have strengths and you each have weaknesses. And you do not want to take and use every one of your weaknesses when your wife has that same thing as a strength, right? You want to take your wife's strengths into account and use them to make up for your weaknesses in those areas. And that's not being a man. No, that is being a man, accepting that other people have strengths and listening to your wife. But it's also being a man and accepting the burden of the final say. When you make that final decision, you accept the responsibility, you accept the consequences that come from making that decision. So leadership continued. Mature masculinity expresses its leadership in romantic relations. So when you have a relationship, you're supposed to lead. You're supposed to do something with it. So you have to lead in the relationship. When you have something going wrong, you have to lead. The man should propose to the woman. The man shouldn't just leave the woman hanging for 5, 6, 7 years. Mature masculinity expresses itself in a family by taking the initiative and disciplining the children when both parents are present and a family standard has been broken. I've seen it where a man will not take the responsibility and discipline the children. And he'll just let his wife do it because she's always home with the children, so she knows how it's done better. But when you do that, you make your wife the bad guy essentially, and you don't show that those rules, that breaking the rules that you and your wife agreed upon, are a violation of your relationship with that child. When you discipline your child, you're showing your children that you're involved just as much as their mother. You're also not making her the bad guy all the time, and you're showing that they should respect her just like they respect you, who you are. They should know that a violation of something that she says, right, is going to lead to you enforcing those rules, those standards, when they decide that they're not going to listen to her. Mature masculinity is sensitive to cultural expressions of masculinity and adapts to them where no sin is involved, in order to communicate to a woman that a man would like to relate not in any aggressive or perverted way, but with maturity and dignity as a man. Clear example of this is opening the door. Men should open the doors for women. Now, does that mean they are completely incapable of figuring out how a doorknob works? I would say absolutely not, right? They can open the door themselves if they wanted to, but it's a cultural expression of what it means to be a man. Walking on the outside, walking next to the road when you're walking along with a woman, That's a cultural expression, maybe more outdated and not on the top of our heads when we think of cultural expressions of manhood. Um, but if that's what our culture expects, then that is what we should do to show that we are a man. There's nothing wrong with it. And it shows to others that we're accepting of the responsibility that God has given to us. Mature masculinity recognizes that the call to leadership is a call to repentance and humility and risk taking. You're going to get things wrong as a man. That's life. That's being a human being. Even when you're saved, even when you've been born again, even when you have the new man within you. Um the call to leadership is a call to repentance. You're going to get things wrong, and guess what? You're going to have to change your mind about it. You're going to have forgiveness. You're going to have humility and admit when you're wrong, admit when you didn't do things the right way, admit when you failed your responsibility and failed to take responsibility. You also have to be somebody who's willing to take a risk and lean out on something. Because women are not risk takers. Women will do anything to avoid risk. Men are naturally more prone to taking risk, especially when they're younger. And there are things that are risky. There are things that are dangerous that you have to do to protect your family, to provide for your family. So the next aspect is provision. So providing for your wife. The man should feel a responsibility to provide for his woman. Provision, we think of a man being a husband. Well, we think of a breadwinner. And what that means is that he's providing for his family to have food and having the shelter. Now, it's not just financial, right? If she has a job, right, she has a job when he has a job and she's making more money than him, that doesn't mean that he's not being a man. No, he should feel the responsibility to provide for his woman, for his family. And that is not because she can't provide for herself. Because Proverbs 31 pictures a woman with great ability in the business affairs of the family. She's able to sell, buy, and sell. She's able to make gains for the family, to accrue wealth. So providing is not because she's totally unable to, but is for the greater good and stability of the family unit. And I think why God made the man the provider is the woman's going to have times with the children where she's nurturing their young, the times where she's pregnant and she's sick and unable to provide for the family. And the man is there as the protector and as the provider to ensure that the family has not just money, but they have food, that they have shelter, that they have protection, that they have safety, that they have a future, that he's ensuring their best interest for years to come. And it's not because she's unable to, but it's because that's what God has called him to, is to ensure that the family has what they need. And the last aspect is protection. Mature masculinity senses a natural, God given responsibility to step forward and put himself between the assailant and the woman. If you're walking on the street and you saw an old lady and there were these guys following her, and they were going after this elderly lady, they look like they might attack her. Um, is it good for you to just run away as a man and give up on her? Walk faster to get away from her on the street? No, right? We would accept I'm supposed to do something to stop them, to yell at them, call the cops first, and then physically stop them. There's a responsibility, a call to protect even a woman that you don't know. And that's a God given, a God instilled instinct. And to do otherwise would show that you have no courage, would show that you're not an honorable man when it's completely in your power to do something. That doesn't mean that you're always putting yourself at risk and you're always looking for situations where you can do something, but there's always something you can do even if it's not getting involved, right? Getting physically involved. You can call the cops. There are all types of things you can do. You can, I wouldn't say just take a video, but there's a time where you have to step in and you have to stop it with whatever's in your power. And to not see those things, to not think about those things, to not physically be in a shape where you can provide those things is a neglect of your God given responsibility. And it's a good reason why men should be working out so that they can be the protector. If you're a weak man, if you have no muscle, if you haven't been putting yourself under any burden, how well are you able to protect your family? If you don't possess a firearm and somebody breaks into your house, it's going to be more difficult for you to protect your family. And a God given responsibility of man is to protect his family. We could look at all the things that the world says to do, and some of them would be the same. But masculinity is not doing things in order to get things. Masculinity should be a sacrifice to give and to love, potentially one day, if God gives you a wife, right? Husbands are called to love their wives as Christ loved the church, as it says in Ephesians 5. And that way that he loved the church, you look at John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, right? On the cross to die for the sins of all mankind. That is a physical sacrifice sometimes. Sometimes it's a mental sacrifice. Sometimes it's emotional sacrifice. Sometimes it's a financial sacrifice and not spending the things that you want to spend on yourself and instead spending that money on your wife, on your family. But it is a great calling. And men without this responsibility, when they choose to do something else within their lives, when they choose not to get married, they often end up lacking that responsibility that keeps them going from day to day. Men are willing to persevere through a lot when they have a feeling that they're needed. And to think that the only way to be a man, the only way to get a wife is to somehow do all these life hacks, get a Bugatti, get a Rolex, have this fancy job, learn to manipulate women. That is not biblical masculinity. That is not genuine masculinity. That isn't mature masculinity. Mature masculinity is always a giving of self in order to provide, in order to protect for someone else. Not putting all your own interests aside, but seeking to put somebody else's interests first. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Please tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you've read this book, great. Tell me what great things you got out of this book. Also, if you haven't read the book, you should purchase Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood by Piper and Grudem. I think it's the best single volume on the subject, and we aren't supposed to bend to the culture's definition of what it means to be a man. We're supposed to accept and apply what the Bible has told us about being a man. Thanks, guys.